If you're looking for nice projects to do, to dive into to become better at coding, I have a whole list of suggestions for you today. At least some of these projects are not that hard to do and they could actually make you some money. Now, getting started with a new project takes some preparation. I have a free guide for you. You can get this at ArjanCodes/design guide. It contains the 7 steps that I take when I design new software. And hopefully it helps you avoid some of the mistakes I made in the past. ArjanCodes/design guide, link is also in the description of this video. Now, how do you determine whether a project is interesting? Well, you could look at a couple of different things like, for example, real-world relevance. Is it a project on climate change versus, let's say, mail stamp collection? Another thing you could look at is whether there's a community of other people working on this project so that you can talk to them, ask them questions, and learn from them as well. Or you could look at whether the project is aligned to your current skill level. Is it something that you would find very easy to work on, or is it something that's going to be very complex for you to get in? Or another thing you can think about is whether you find the topic personally interesting. Now, of course, I can't really judge what you find personally interesting, but what I am going to do is give a 5-star rating to 3 criteria for each project that I'm going to talk about. The first criteria is how easy it is. Is it easy to get something working, something that's usable, or is it going to take a lot of work for you to build something that actually does something useful? The second criteria that I'll look at is how expandable is the project. Does it have a very limited scope, or can you actually continue building and expanding on it while you're also learning new things? And the third one is, can you make some money with it? And now, making money in itself is maybe not really what you're interested in, or maybe you are, I don't know. But if you can make some money from it, it can sometimes help. For example, you could invest in designing a website or a logo, or help the project reach more people so that it's actually being used more. And if you can make money off a project, then that kind of helps establish that. So that's what I'll also look into. So I'm going to go through these project ideas. I'm going to start with a few pretty standard project ideas, and then I have a couple of different ones, and then I'll end the list with a few things that could actually be useful tools to developers or to yourself when you're developing code. So first project idea is to build a simple calculator. You can start with very basic arithmetic operations and then move on to more complex things like trigonometry or logarithms and things like that. You could build a GUI for a calculator, which is kind of the standard way to do it. But you could also do it differently. For example, you could make a console application so that you can actually do these operations in the console. But another thing you can do is approach it slightly differently. And for example, take some inspiration from apps like Numi that are actually text-based calculators. And this is actually really fun. You could add some text processing that allow you to calculate all kinds of different things. And then it would be a kind of different approach to a calculator that could also still be a lot of fun to develop. So how to rate this? Well, 1, I think this is actually pretty easy to develop and pretty easy to get something very usable out of this. So I'm going to rate this a 5 out of 5 for easiness. How expandable is this? Well, you could do a couple of things like I mentioned, but still the scope is quite limited. It is in the end a calculator app. I mean, if you add too many features to it, then it's probably going to grow into something else than a calculator. So if you want to stay true to the calculator thing, then it's probably not that expandable. So I'd give it a 2 out of 5. Third rating is money. Can you make money with it? You could, but I think it's also a pretty standard app that everybody already has on their operating system, except on the iPad. But if you make it like a really cool app, you could probably make some money with it. So I'd give this a 2 out of 5. The second project, it's also something that is quite commonly suggested, is to create a to-do list application. But what you could actually do is use Python to create a command line application that allows users to add, remove, view items on their to-do list. So what could you do? Well, if you make it a command line tool, I think that could be kind of fun, and you don't have to develop a complex GUI that way, so it's pretty easy to get started. You could still store these to-dos in the cloud somewhere in the database, so that could add some interesting aspect to this type of application. You could also build integrations with other apps. So if you build an API, for example, for your to-do list application or have webhooks, then you can actually take an action once you post a to-do or when you complete a to-do to automatically send an email or whatever you want to do. And If you want to make it really nice, you could actually integrate it with tools like Zapier so that you can then integrate your to-do list with any type of the thousands of apps that are part of the Zapier ecosystem. So I think it's a fun way to kind of discover how to develop an API, how to work with tools like Zapier, and what kind of cool integrations you can build. So not a completely standard to-do list application, but something slightly different that might be a bit more interesting. So how easy is this? Well, it's still pretty easy because building a to-do list, there's like tons of tutorials online. So to get started, it's pretty easy. I'd say 4 out of 5. How expandable is this? Well, once you take it to integrations with Zapier, APIs, etc., storing stuff in a database, maybe doing more complex to-do list items like checklists and things like that, I think that's actually pretty expandable. So that's a 5 out of 5, I'd say. And in terms of making money with this, that's a bit harder. I mean, there's already tons of to-do list apps out there, so you'd be part of a very big competitive space. So money, I don't think you can make money very easily with this. So I'd give this a 2 out of 5. Third project you could work on is a weather application. Now, you might say weather application, why is that interesting? Well, on the one hand, it could be interesting to learn how to use an API. So you could use a Python library to access weather data from the API, display the current temperature and forecast for some given location. It would allow you to work a bit with graphics to visualize those things. You could integrate this with Google Maps, which could be a cool extension. But there's also a couple of other non-standard things you could do with a weather application, like maybe you should gamify it. Perhaps let people guess what the weather is going to be like, and then reward people with points if they got it right. And you can share that with other people. So you're like the coolest weatherman on earth or something like that. So there's, I'd say, a couple of nice, funny, interesting things you could actually do with a weather app. So ratings, easy. I'd say this is a bit less easy to build because you need to do the API stuff. You need the graphics part, especially if you want to integrate with Google Maps and overlay information on top of that. That's quite some work. You might have to build a GUI around it. So that's not that easy. I'd say 3 out of 5. How expandable is this? Well, I'd say not that expandable. I mean, it's still going to be a weather app, even though you could gamify some things, which could be fun. So I'd give this a 2 or maybe a 3 out of 5. Can you make money with this? I think that's going to be pretty hard, so I'm going to give that a 1 out of 5. Another thing you could build is a web scraper. You could use Python to scrape data from websites, store it in a format that can be easily analyzed or used for other purposes. Perhaps you could store it in a database, and then you can query the database to get the information that you need. So you can use the requests package to retrieve data from websites, and then use tools like Beautiful Soup or Scrapy to parse HTML data and analyze that. And then if you store data in a database, like a SQLite database, for example, you can query it later. Now, there is a caveat. Many websites actually don't really want you to scrape all the data, which sort of makes sense, right? So you have to be careful to not break the law. But still, it could be a fun project to do. Rating, how easy is this? I'd say 4 out of 5 stars. It's pretty easy to get started with scraping data, especially with these libraries that I mentioned. If you want to add the database, it might be a bit more complicated since you'd have to convert the data into something that you can actually store in a database and have meaningful queries of that. How expandable is this? I'd say a 2 out of 5, but I mean, it sort of depends on what kind of data you're scraping and what you want to do with that data. Can you make money with this? I'd say not really. Well, maybe a 2 out of 5. I mean, it only starts to make sense when you scrape a lot of data. And like I said, you have to be careful because many websites actually don't allow you to scrape their data. In general, you can assume that if the data on a website is valuable, then you're probably not allowed to scrape, and then you can't really make money off of it. Next project, which could be fun, is to build a simple game. So some ideas: you can use Python libraries like Pygame to build a game, or you could actually go old school and create a very cool text-based adventure. When I was a teenager, I actually created a couple of these text-based adventures myself. It was really a lot of fun to work on those. If you need assets for your game, you can use something like Open Game Art that publishes a lot of assets that you can use for free. It's mostly 8-bit games and things like that, but it's kind of cool. In terms of rating, how easy is this? Well, I'd say if you use Pygame, this is not that hard, but I mean, building a game is actually quite a lot of work, especially if you want it to be fun. So I'd say this is a 3 out of 5, but you're going to learn a lot by building a game. How expandable is this? I'd say pretty expandable. I mean, you could create lots of different levels, lots of different game mechanics, and it can get pretty complicated. I mean, I don't think you should try to develop a AAA game as your first Python project. And of course, Python is not really the programming language to use for building games, but for learning more about Python, it could be a fun project. Okay, make money from this. I'd say that's going to be pretty hard. So maybe a 1 or a 2 out of 5. I mean, nobody's really developing professional games in Python, like I said, so you're not really going to be able to sell that easily. This is more like a learning experience. Actually, I found myself really fun to work on game development. When I was teaching at the university, I taught a game programming course, and I let students basically extend an existing 2D game that I built myself with some basic game physics, and you were this bomb character and you had to pick up water drops and reach the end of the level within 30 seconds or something like that. When I designed the levels for this game that my students were working on, I actually made them really hard on purpose at the end, and I added really annoying game music so that they had to die and play it over and over again. Yeah, I guess I was a pretty evil teacher. Nee ja. You haven't liked the video yet. You haven't subscribed to my channel. What have I done? I'm actually a stable person, as long as I have a Barbie and a hacksaw. Anyway, next hobby project. Write a script for your favorite operating system that automates repetitive tasks. Apple, for example, has things like shortcuts, but you could build something that does some job for you using a script, and that could actually be a pretty nice thing to learn more about Python and how it integrates with the operating system. Some ideas of the things you could automate is batch renaming files or folders, automatically creating backups of a folder and storing that somewhere else, automatically deleting temporary folders to save space, or download data and store that in a file like monthly bank statements, invoices, those kind of things. You could make a script that logs activity on your computer and automatically stores that somewhere so that you can see what your system has actually been doing over the last week, kind of sort of benchmarking to see what applications are behaving and what applications are just using a lot of space and memory. There's lots of these little scripts that you could write that do small tasks for you automatically. Ratings. How easy is this? Well, of course, that depends on the type of script that you're writing, but these scripts are generally going to be pretty limited, pretty small. So I'd say it's pretty easy, 4 out of 5 to get started with this. How expandable is this? Well, you can write tons and tons of scripts and tons of different automations. So I'd say this is pretty expandable, and there's lots of opportunities for you to learn new things. So maybe a 4 out of 5. Can you make money with this? I don't think you really can make money with this that easily. So I'd say 1 out of 5. It's really more for your personal use, unless, of course, you find one really cool automation that somehow nobody has thought of and that you can actually release as a separate app. I mean, then you can certainly make some money with this. Next project is to create a chatbot that can respond to user input. So you can use Python libraries like NLTK, TensorFlow. This might not be very useful given everything that's happening now with ChatGPT, so it might actually be interesting to not actually create the chatbot yourself by training a model, but actually integrating with the OpenAI API and then using a chatbot like that. What you could do is personalize this a bit more and, for example, not use the chatbot for general queries like what ChatGPT is able to do, but actually use it more as a personal assistant. So obviously then you also need to feed it personal training data. And then you might not want to use the OpenAI API directly. What could be a slightly different way to approach this is that instead of just using the API, that you're actually thinking about integration with the tools that you're using, like Slack, Teams, or a Signal app. Or you could pick a specific area of expertise where you're going to use the chatbot in. For example, one thing you could do is build a note-taking tool, but integrate AI tools directly into your note-taking tool so that it knows about how you write, what you're working on, your items in your agenda, and then you can use all that information to more quickly write useful notes. How easy is this? It is quite easy to get started, but actually to get something that's actually useful, I'd say that's quite a bit of work because it depends on how you want to integrate this. That's going to be the trick, obviously. So it's not that easy. It's a 2 out of 5. How expandable is this? I'd say this is reasonably expandable. You could use a chatbot or an AI system in lots of different ways. So I would say this is about a 3 to 4 out of 5 in terms of expandability. Can you make money with this? Well, you maybe could make some money with this, especially if it's a useful application that other people can actually use and didn't think about. I mean, when you think about it, this is like a whole new thing that chatbots are getting this good. And we're just touching the surface of the integrations and the possibilities at the moment. So I think there's a lot of opportunity right now in thinking of new ways in which we can use these chat assistants in the tools that we're building. So I think there's actually a possibility to make some money with this if you have a good idea. So I'd rate this a 3 or 4 out of 5. Before I continue with the rest of these projects, here's a question. What project have you worked on recently that helped you learn tons of new things? Let me know in the comments. Next project idea is a Markdown editor and viewer in Python. You could use an existing Markdown parser like Marco or Python Markdown. You can use tkinter or Qt to build a GUI and then integrate the Markdown viewer. What's nice about Markdown is that it has lots of opportunities to write integrations or plugins for it. For example, you could extend the Markdown format to integrate things like code editors and playgrounds and things like that, or visualize charts or incorporate HTML content. So you could build a sort of really advanced editor that goes way beyond something like Word, for example. Or you could actually create a system where you can write Markdown, but you can actually have code inside the Markdown document with a run button so that you can actually run the Python code that you write directly in the document, sort of developing a playground system to explain coding to people. I think there's lots of possibilities there. It's not that easy to get started because there's not really a clear, simple way to get Markdown and rendered Markdown in Python. Other programming environments do have that. For example, in TypeScript, it's really easy to get started because there is the lexical editor, which is really cool. But in Python, I don't think something like that really exists. So easy, I would say a 2 out of 5 to get started with this. Expandable, I'd say with plugins, this is pretty expandable, maybe 3 to 4 out of 5. And finally, can you make money with this? I don't really see how. I mean, it's going to take a lot of work to get there. So making money, I'd rate that a 1 out of 5. Next project is a budget tracker. You could use Python to create a budget tracking application that allows you to track your expenses, your income, your net worth over time. There's a couple of cool things you can do with this. For example, you could integrate this directly with your bank's API to collect transactions and automatically input them into your budget tracking system. You could use machine learning to classify these transactions so that they're automatically put into the right categories. Then you can store all this data locally in a SQLite database. And then, for example, you could create reports to help you understand your financial situation. You can use platforms like Dash or Streamlit to build a dashboard very easily, which, by the way, I did a video series about Dash a while ago. I've put a link at the top. You can do other things like planning and budgeting and letting your software compute how much time it's going to take. So if you save X amount per month, then this is when you can purchase your new gaming console or something like that. But altogether, I think that could be a really cool app to build. So rating, how easy is this? Well, not that easy because you need to integrate APIs. You may need to create visualizations of data and things like that. So I'd say a 3 out of 5, also because you need a GUI. How expandable is this? I'd say this is pretty expandable. You could also think about integrating this again with other tools, like automatically giving you a notification or sending you an email when you reached a certain budget target. You could gamify things. So there's, I think, lots of possibilities for expanding this tool. Can you make money with this? I think you could actually make money with this. I mean, there are certainly competing tools that already do some of these things, but I think if you're a bit creative, you could definitely build something cool. Next project is to develop a sentiment analysis tool. You can use libraries like NLTK, scikit-learn to build a sentiment analysis tool that can classify text as positive, negative, or neutral. And then you can combine that with other APIs or systems to represent the text that you've classified in different ways. For example, you could combine this with a news API and then you could create a page that only shows the positive news. Although probably if you want a positive news page, maybe it's easier to just create an empty HTML document. That's a lot faster. Anyway, in terms of rating, how easy is it? Well, creating an empty HTML page is very easy. But if you want to actually build the tool, it's maybe not that easy. Although libraries exist, I'd say easy, maybe 3 to 4 out of 5. How expandable is this? Meh. Not really, I think. I mean, you could use the tools in different ways, obviously, but just the sentiment analysis part, I don't think it's that expandable. So I'd give this a 2 out of 5. Can you make money with this? Well, not really. I think that's going to be pretty hard because there's already tons of tutorials on building sentiment analysis tools. And then you'd have to think of really a good application to actually be able to make money with this. Or probably integrate it into something that you already have, where it's going to help the application do a better job of what it's supposed to do. And final few items, I'm going to focus on tools for software development. So I think there's a couple of things you could do, a couple of projects you could work on that are actually helpful to software developers. One is an application that detects duplicate code. You could use Python to write a script that detects and reports on duplicate code in a Python code base. Then you can use NLTK for tokenization, parsing. You can use text similarity metrics like bag of words, word frequencies, etc. And then you can go beyond these exact comparisons because, of course, there's not going to be a lot of exact duplicate code, but you will probably have duplicate code in the sense of that some variable names might be slightly different, but that the code is then almost the same. So it could be a pretty useful tool to help you find duplicate code in your Python scripts. Ratings, how easy is this? I'd say 4 out of 5. These libraries already exist, and the main thing is going through all the different files in a folder and then just comparing them. So I think that's doable. How expandable is this? I'd say this is not that expandable. It's like a pretty focused project, detecting code duplicates. Of course, you could spend a lot of time on developing new algorithms to better detect duplicate code. But it's in that sense, it's pretty focused and it's not really that expandable. So I'd give this a 2 out of 5. Can you make money with this? Well, if it's part of a larger suite of tools for developers, it could actually make money if you could develop this as a VS Code plugin, for example. So I'd say 2 to 3 out of 5. Now, related to that, another thing you could do is also another project on dependency analysis. You could use Python to analyze import statements in a code base and then construct a sort of graph of dependencies between the modules. The basic idea of this wouldn't be too hard, though if you have to map these dependencies, it might lead to duplicates, dealing with relative versus absolute imports. So that's going to be a bit complicated. You might want to add some information about which modules are the least or the most connected. So you can actually use this to detect coupling in your code. And if there is a way for you to improve this, you could also create visualizations of this automatically by using Mermaid or UML diagrams, call graphs or trees or things like that. So there might be a graphics challenge in here, because then of course you'd also have to decide how you're going to visualize those diagrams so that they're actually clear and that you don't have a bunch of overlapping arrows. How easy is this? I'd say it's not that easy. I'd give this a 3 out of 5. How expandable is this? Well, you have lots of options for visualization, so I'd give this a 3 out of 5 or maybe even a 4 out of 5. Can you make money with this? It's kind of similar to the previous project. I think you can, but it should probably be part of a larger suite of development tools. So I'll give this a 3 out of 5. Next tool that you could build, that is kind of a continuation of the previous project, is a general metrics collector. So you can use Python to collect all kinds of metrics about a code base, like the lines of code, the number of functions, the number of classes, the number of comments. You can use packages like Radon as a basis. You can integrate this with Flake 8, Pylint, or Black to also detect style issues in your code. And then you could create a VS Code plugin that does all this automatically and then produces reports about this. Or you could build something that you feed a Git link, and then it's going to analyze all the code in that Git repository and produce a report. You could even take this to a new level by creating a website that basically does this automatically for lots and lots of Git repositories, and then creates a ranking of the highest quality libraries. It's sort of web scraping, but it might be cool to have this, that you could have a website where you can enter any repository and then you get an idea of the quality of the code before you actually decide to use that package in your application. How easy is this? Depends on how far you take this. I think to get started, it's relatively easy because these metrics are already there in packages. But if you want to take this to the next level, I'd say this is to 3 out of 5. It can be pretty complex. Also, I think this is pretty expandable because there's lots of metrics and things you can do to gauge the quality of a code base. So I'd say this is a 5 out of 5. Can you make money out of this? Well, I actually think you can. If you have a website where you produce all of these results, all of these comparisons of different libraries, you could actually create a subscription service where companies pay a monthly subscription fee to be able to access this data. And then you keep the data up to date whenever a new version of the library is released. So something like this, I think, could be a cool project and could actually make you some money. The final project I want to mention is a refactoring helper. Something that analyzes the structure of a code base and then suggests refactoring possibilities, moving functions to a different class or a different module, rewriting or shortening loops, things like this. You could start by just creating a small collection of best practices and try to detect that in the code if there is some code that violates those best practices. For example, if a for loop only has a single line in the body and fills a list, you could suggest to use a list comprehension instead. And you can parse the Python code using Python and then detect deviations from these best practices. The first step could be to just make the suggestions and not change anything. But then the second step could be to actually provide the refactoring that you should apply. You could even extend this tool so that best practices are customizable so that they follow your company's style guide. Another thing you can do is build an integration with Git and the code review process so that you can actually use this tool to support you in your code reviews. So rating how easy is this? I think this is actually pretty hard to do because you need to write a parser and you need to define what those best practices are and you want to make sure you don't have false positives and things like that. So it's not so easy. So I'd say this is a 1 out of 5. How expandable is this? Well, I think you can take this really far. There's lots of things you can do and you can add step by step if you build on these best practices. Of course, you could incorporate machine learning into this to help you detect these things more easily. So I'd say this is pretty expandable. There's lots of things you can do here. Also in terms of possible integrations like what I mentioned with Git. And can you make money with this? Well, I think similarly to the previous projects that I mentioned, I think it will be helpful if this is part of a whole suite of tools. But I think this, if you would have this as a standalone tool, it could be something that people would pay money for, actually. So I'd give this a 4 or maybe even a 5 out of 5 in terms of the money rating. I hope you enjoyed this list and that gave you some food for thought, some ideas for fun projects you could do to get better at Python. Now, something you should definitely do if you want to grow as a developer is watch this video next, which tells you what not to do. Thanks for watching and take care.